Oh, oh dear. Oh dearie, dearie me. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, that's not good. This tree is emanating rather a lot of artron energy. Yes, you've told a few tales in your time, haven't you, old fellow? Quite a few stories. Yes. Yeah. Oh, hello. I'm the doctor. Well, one of them anyway. Probably not the one you're expecting. No. See, I'm back regenerated again. Yes, I know. New face. New body. Yeah. Yes, I've done that quite a few times, haven't I? Yes. Yeah, a few there. Yes. A few times, yes, maybe not. Yeah. Well, yes, I am a new doctor. I'm still sort of trying to get into the feel of it. A little bit of that regeneration energy still around. But I've already had a couple of adventures which I can tell you about. Well, actually, no. I'll let one of my friends tell you all about it. This last one was at Christmas, and it involved two very eminent Victorian gentlemen. But I'll let Dr. Watson tell you all about that. So until we meet again, goodbye. Goodbye. It was on the morning of Christmas Eve in the year of 1888 when I called in at number 221B Baker Street to wish my good friend and confidant, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the compliments of the season. I was most surprised to find that, having waited several minutes, the door was finally answered, not by Mrs. Hudson, but by Holmes himself, dressed in a silk dressing gown and his Arabian carpet slippers, looking somewhat the worse for wear. My initial fears that he had once again succumbed to his reliance on chemical stimuli were soon assuaged as he ushered me upstairs, explaining that Mrs. Hudson was away for Christmas, visiting her Aunt Sally in the country, and he had dispensed with the services of her temporary replacement, Phyllis, an American lady, some days earlier. I entered Holmes's room to find them in a state of complete disarray. Such was the mess, I immediately thought that my dear friend had been in a fight. Perhaps one of Professor Moriarty's henchmen, out for revenge, had broken in. But it soon became clear that Holmes, though a man of considerable intellect, highly skilled, and motivated beyond measure, was quite incapable of looking after himself, and had failed in even the simplest task of preparing a meal beyond a plate of congealed cold cuts, though how many days old I dare not think, nor making a pot of coffee. I set about tidying up, while Holmes retired to his dressing room to get changed. It was while I was clearing up the littering of discarded newspapers from the study floor that I noticed a headline in that morning's copy of the London Times. Blue carbuncle gemstones stolen from the British Museum. I began to read the article. The world-famous blue carbuncle, a priceless jewel on loan to the British Museum from the collection of the Countess of Morcar, has been stolen again. The article went on to an account of how the jewel had been stolen a year previously, almost to the day. But the police at Scotland Yard were baffled as to how it had been taken from the museum this time. Inspector Lestrade had been quoted as saying, "It is beyond belief. The jewel was safe and sound under lock and key. The museum is guarded night and day, and as far as myself and my fellow officers can tell, there has been no attempt to break into the establishment." "Well, what do you make of it, Watson?" Holmes had been standing at the door for some time, observing me. I replied that I was at a loss, but suggested that perhaps James Ryder, who had attempted to steal the blue carbuncle the previous year, had returned from his self-imposed exile from the continent to try again. Holmes dismissed this with a brief wave of his hand. "That particular villain has learned his lesson, and knows only too well the consequences should he ever return to England's fine shores." He moved to the window to look out at the street. The fine dusting of snow, which had started to fall as I had left my house earlier that morning, had now begun to collect on the pavement below. "Besides," he continued, "the theft is far beyond the capabilities of such a petty criminal. You read the report? The jewel was locked inside a display cabinet in a secure gallery within a guarded museum. With no evidence of a break-in, this is indeed a fine mystery, and one, if I am not mistaken, we are soon to be invited to help solve. If you will be so kind as to go down and answer the door, I believe you will find the erstwhile Inspector Lestrade awaiting you on our doorstep." There was a rat-tat-tat at the door. "Upon my soul," I replied, joining him at the window. To my amazement, there stood the aforementioned Bow Street Inspector at Holmes's door. "How have you taken to witchcraft?" I spluttered. "Oh, really, Watson, you know my methods. I merely listened to the sound of the carriage which drew up outside. Even on such a covering of snow, due to the weight and width of the metal wheels, it could not be a mere hansom cab, but something larger. It was unlikely to be a delivery cart, due to it being Christmas Eve. It would be a poor show for a store to deliver this late in the day for the festive season. I therefore deduced that the likelihood of it being a police vehicle, more than likely. My suspicions were confirmed when I heard the distinctive click of the inspector's hobnail boots upon the pavement as he alighted from the carriage. Promotion may take a constable off the beat, but you can never take the bobby out of a policeman. A brief glance at the footprints in the snow of a man who walked with a slight twist to the left leg only proved to me that I was correct in my assumption, and that it was Bow Street's finest who came knocking upon our door. Shaking my head as how simple it all seems when explained in such a way, I went downstairs to let Lestrade in, and was soon ushering him into the sitting room. "Come in, Lestrade," said Holmes, pointing to a chair opposite, where he now stood by the fireplace. "I would offer you a drink, but I detect it has not been so long since you last had one. A coffee, with perhaps a nip in it to keep out the cold, yes?" The inspector looked at him in aghast. "Once again, Mr. Holmes, you amaze me with your observational skills. Tell me, do, what hidden clue gave me away, sir?" "I can smell it on your breath," he replied with a slight sardonic smile upon his face. "Well, 'tis the season," he mumbled, his flushed weasel face turned to the floor. "Indeed," mused Holmes, turning away to stare into the flickering flames in the fireplace. But I warrant you have not come here today to bid myself and Dr. Watson season's greetings. The blue carbuncle has gone missing again, and you have come to enlist our help. Is that not so? Indeed it is, Mr. Holmes, he nodded. And I have to say, sir, this is as spine-chilling a case as ever I have known. Now, I'm not one to believe in phantoms, ghosts and goonies and what-not, but from my own extensive investigations, gentlemen, I don't believe anything as walked on God's earth could have got in and out of that gallery and spirited away that blue crystal without leaving no trace of themselves behind. There's something weird going on in that museum. I swear it fair gives me the shivers. But if you and the good doctor would be kind enough to accompany me to the British Museum, I have no fear that you will be able to sort it out and it will be all over before Christmas. Well, Watson, cried Holmes, leaping to collect his top hat and overcoat, what say you to a ghost story for Christmas, eh? The game is afoot! Our journey from Baker Street was to be short. In the dim light of Lestrade's carriage, I could not help but notice the fire in Holmes' eyes. Spending time without a case to stimulate his vast intellect is intolerable for him. To have an opportunity to solve such a mystery as the one we now faced would be the perfect Christmas gift for him. However, he warned me, he did not think we would be alone in our investigation. It was his belief that there were others abroad that night who had interests in our, as he put it, pretty little case. I did not have time to inquire more, as we had arrived at our destination. The snow, which showed no sign of letting up, now lay thick upon the steps leading up to the massive Ionic columns at the front of the British Museum. Holmes scanned the scene in front of us like the veritable bloodhound he is reputed to be. His eyes viewed everything with an unsurpassable intensity. I see you have been following in the footsteps of our colonial cousins, Lestrade, he said, nodding towards what looked to me to be nothing more than a blue wooden shed in the corner of the courtyard. I'm surprised. I thought the Glasgow Constabulary had managed to steal a march on you. Lestrade shook his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Holmes, but I do not have the faintest idea of what you are talking about. The police box man, replied Holmes in exasperation. He strode over to the wooden structure and rapped his knuckles upon the door. I looked above the pair of glass-paned windows to an illuminated sign, which quite plainly read, Police Public Call Box. It was a wooden structure about the size of the ticket collector's hut at Paddington Station, but painted in a dark blue, which looked, by its weathered appearance, somewhat worse for wear. Well, I'm blowed, gasped the inspector. We're still waiting for a telephonic apparatus at the yard, and the powers that be have put one out here. The door of the police box opened suddenly. Incongruously, light streamed out from it as the head of a small man popped out. Hello, can I help you? Taken by surprise, we all stepped back as the little man stepped out into the snow. Behind him, a young lady of, I would say, her mid-20s, turned, closed and locked the door, pocketing the key in her fur-lined hand muff. The man raised his hat. Hello, I'm the doctor, and this is my good friend Jade. Being a great believer in etiquette and good manners, I introduced ourselves likewise. In reply, Sherlock Holmes? The little man looked puzzled. The Sherlock Holmes? But where's the deerstalker and the cape? I saw Holmes wince noticeably and look to the heavens. I hope for the young lady's sake she did not catch the expletive he muttered under his breath. Holmes does not wear an Inverness cape and deerstalker, and was somewhat annoyed to find that in the case of the Oriental Conjurer, which had been erroneously associated to him by the Limehouse Constabulary, a mysteriously unnamed private detective had worn such a garb. Somehow the public had got wind of this, and now it seemed to be de rigueur for amateur sleuths to be imagined in this way. Holmes replied through gritted teeth, "Although I am no follower of fashion, even I would consider it such a ridiculous idea to wear something so patently suitable for country pursuits in the city." I stifled a chuckle and studied the man before us. As I had been instructed by Holmes on more than one occasion, I put my own observational skills to good use as I looked the doctor up and down. He was a short man, somewhat portly and hairy. He wore round, rimmed glasses. His clothes were ill-fitting and seemed to have been thrown together from several different wardrobes and styles. A rhapsody of all that could be described as bohemian. He was wearing a wide-brimmed dark fedora hat. His long greying brown hair hung loose about the collar and down the back of a long black woolen overcoat. Tightly wound around his neck, he wore the longest woolen scarf I have ever seen. Knitted in the brightest colours of the rainbow, it hung down to the ground. Below his coat he wore a white collarless shirt with a neckerchief befitting that of a common working man, but over which was a harlequin waistcoat of the same rainbow colours that matched his scarf. This, I noted, had not only seen better days, but also seemed to be several sizes too small, as the buttons bulged alarmingly around his rather rotund tummy. I wondered for a second if this strange little man would not seem more at home in the artistic quarter of Paris rather than the historical academia of London. With a shiver, he quickly buttoned up his overcoat. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, like some theatrical prestidigitator, he produced an umbrella, which he proceeded to unfurl over their heads. Strangely enough, this too matched all the colours of the rainbow. He strode out into the white-covered yard, looking for all the world like he owned the place, leaving his companion behind, unprotected from the falling snow. Lestrade stepped forward. "Now look here, sir, Doctor whoever you are. This is a police investigation. You are not allowed—" "Not allowed?" The doctor turned to him. "Not allowed? I'm allowed everywhere." And with that, he produced from the inside pocket of his overcoat a leather wallet containing a card, which he thrust before the inspector and Holmes's eyes. Lestrade read aloud. "Dr. John Smith, Royal Inspector for the Torchwood Institute, to be afforded access to all areas and be offered assistance at all times by order of Her Majesty the Queen." Oh, Lord. It's signed by Her Majesty herself. It may have been my imagination, but I'm quite sure of this. I saw him give a little bow. Holmes studied the paper closely, raising an eyebrow, pursed his lips, and murmured quietly, "Indeed." Rolling up his umbrella and using it as a walking stick, the doctor began to climb up the steps of the museum's front entrance. "Well, come along, gentlemen. Jade, I believe we have a pressing engagement inside, and the mystery of a missing blue jewel to uncover. We haven't got all day, you know. Time waits for no one." With that, he bounded up the last few steps and into the museum. Being ever the gentleman, I turned to Jade. "After you, Miss—" I left the question hanging in the air. "Smith," she replied. "Oh!" Glancing up to the quickly retreating doctor, I asked, "Any relation?" "Good God, no," was her aghast reply. By the time our party entered the gallery from which the blue carbuncle had been stolen, the doctor had thrown off his overcoat and scarf and was lying flat on his back underneath the locked display case in which the jewel had been exhibited. It was only then that I could finally see his face fully. He sported a greying beard in a fashionable cut of the times, which incongruously ended below his thick neck in a tail held together by a tribal bead fashioned in pewter, giving him the impression, what with his long untamed hair and all, of a Viking warrior. Not to be outdone, Holmes was soon to join him in the close inspection of the underside of the cabinet. I looked closer myself, and I have to say, considering the amount of cobwebs which had collected underneath, I was not overly impressed by the fastidiousness of the museum's cleaning staff. Dr. Smith fumbled in his waistcoat pocket and produced from it a contraption one might find in a novel by Monsieur Jules Verne. I could only describe it as a short metallic wand about the size of a Cuban cigar. It had a tiny blue lantern on its tip, which, when lit, emitted the strangest high-pitched noise I have ever encountered. To this day, I can only imagine it as the elongated death cry of a strangled rat. To the untrained eye, he seemed to wave this device, which he later confided was a sonic screwdriver, about with gay abandon. But I noticed that my friend was observing his actions with keen interest. Once the high-pitched noise had stopped, the doctor examined the wand closely and muttered, an unusually high concentration of radiation. Jumping to his feet, wiping cobwebs from his hands, he asked, "Tell me, from where exactly does the blue carbuncle originate?" I piped up. "It is a priceless blue diamond owned by the Countess of Morcar. Though it is believed that she paid £20,000 for the stone from the house of Beaker, the renowned diamond merchant in The Hague. It is worth infinitely more than that now, though. Last year, almost to the day, I might add, it was stolen from the Countess's suite of rooms at the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Holmes and I, in some small part, were able to renew the gemstone with its mistress within a matter of days." "Yes, very good," muttered the doctor, "but I was rather hoping for something more of a long-term history of the stone." Jade, who was by now standing next to the display cabinet, replied, "Oh, that's easy. The legend of the blue carbuncle is believed to be that from a falling star discovered in the deserts of Arabia, it was given as a gift by the Grand Vizier Peter and the Queen Juliet to their daughter, the most beautiful Princess Sharner, whose very smile lit up 1,000 dawns on the occasion of her birthday." We all turned to her in aghast. "How on earth did you know that?" I gasped. "It's written on a card in the cabinet," she grinned. Holmes and the doctor nodded to one another. Then, almost as one, they whipped out a large round magnifying glass from their pockets. With these two implements, they trotted noiselessly about the room, sometimes stopping, occasionally kneeling, and once the doctor lying flat upon his face. As I watched them, I was irresistibly reminded of pure-blooded, well-trained foxhounds as they dashed backwards and forwards through the covert, whining in their eagerness, until they came across the lost scent. Finally, the doctor examined with his glass a small window upon the top of the wall, going over every inch of it with the most minute exactness. This done, he appeared to be satisfied, for he replaced his glass into his pocket. Holmes himself stood up from his close examination of the cabinet and pocketed his magnifying glass too. "Well, Doctor," he asked, "what are your thoughts?" The little man held up his hands. "Oh, no, after you, Sherlock. I may call you Sherlock, mayn't I? You are, after all, the world's greatest detective, and I'm but a humble servant." "Very well." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "The thief, whoever he or she may be, is very small, a child, perhaps a midget." The doctor muttered, "Oh, no, not again." Lestrade looked to my friend. "What makes you say that, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes nodded towards the cabinet. "'Tis my belief that the perpetrator of the crime entered the museum during the day and hid himself beneath the case containing the jewel and waited till nightfall. He emerged later that night to steal the jewel away. I believe, Doctor, you have a theory of how the criminal made his escape." "Yes," he said, looking towards the outer wall. "I was able to perceive through my magnifying glass Turning to Holmes, he added, "Great piece of kit, by the way." I was able to perceive a few strands of the same cobweb as is collected under the cabinet. He held up a few strands of thick grey web. Our thief exited the museum via this window, and if we were to examine the drain pipe outside, I would imagine we would find more traces of this web too. "But surely," I asked, "spider's web can be found all over the place. What makes you certain it's the same?" "Because, gentlemen," announced the doctor, holding it up, "this web is 100 times thicker than that of your common or garden house spider." There was a polite cough from the doorway, and the museum's curator, Sir George Chase, entered, followed by two men dressed in porters' uniforms. The door was held open by a rather nervous-looking secretary, Hicks, who introduced Sir George and explained that Professor Montoyo Castro, the director of the Fine Arts and Rare Treasures Society, who was sponsors of the exhibition, had insisted on extra night security. For this, they had drafted in another night porter, Mansfield, from the waxworks on Marylebone Road, to assist the usual guard, a stout bearded brute by the name of Davis. Holmes and the doctor questioned them, but neither could report that anything out of the ordinary had happened the previous night. Holmes pressed them further, and Davis replied that he had to chase a young Arab out of the gallery that afternoon, "probably looking to pick a pocket or two from the ladies and gents who came to look at the jewels. But he soon felt the rough end of my boot, I can tell you." Holmes pressed his fingers together in a way I know only too well. "Tell me more about the boy. Describe him as exactly as you can, Mr. Davis." "Well, they all look the same to me, sir. Dirty, thieving scoundrels." With a surprising ferocity, Holmes turned on the man. "Now, come now, man. Think. What was he wearing? The colour of his hair? Was he short or tall? Let forth with your brain and less with your prejudice." "The boy was short, scrawny-looking, brown hair." Davis's round face screwed up in concentration as he tried to remember. "Yeah, greasy brown hair, in need of a cut, hanging down his collar. He was." "Oh, and he wore a top hat!" He shouted this last statement as if the revelation had suddenly hit him. "A battered one, mind you, a dirty green one, and he wore a floppy bow at his neck. Oh, thinking himself a proper dandy, I reckon." For some reason I glanced over to the doctor, who seemed to be smiling at some private joke to himself. Holmes looked pensive. "Thank you, Davis," he said dismissively. "You've been most helpful. Well, Watson, it seems we have a lead." "Really, Holmes?" I wondered. "I fail to see how." My friend sighed. "My dear fellow, do you not remember those stout fellows who are our very eyes and ears about the more nefarious boroughs of this once great city? I believe it was you yourself who gave them the moniker of the Baker Street Irregulars." "Of course," I remembered. "The description fits that young whippersnapper Owen to a T." As you may recall, dear reader, the Baker Street Irregulars are a group of street urchins led by a boy named Wiggins. They run errands and track down information for the great detective, and according to Holmes, they are able to go everywhere and hear everything. As he says, that they are as sharp as needles too, for all they want is organisation and perhaps a little care and guidance. Something for which I am proud to say my friend and I have, over the past few years, been able to give with some assistance. For if it had not been for Holmes, my good wife Mary and I, the Marylebone Charity Home for Wayward Boys and Girls would not be in existence today. Owen, the young lad to whom I referred to earlier, is the leader Wiggins' second in command, his right-hand man, you might say. Though he is small for his age, due, I would imagine, to a life of undernourishment and ill treatment, he has the wit and determination of any man 3 times his size. Undoubtedly cocksure and cheeky. Ha ha! The lad has a round face and a smile that beams so bright, one cannot help but like the little fellow. Something he used well to his advantage in his earlier career as a cut-purse. But another thing which sets him apart from his ragamuffin contemporaries is his manner of dress. Thinking himself a cut above the rest, he likes to dress himself in a somewhat higher fashion than someone of his lower standing. As Davis had said, he likes to think of himself as a proper dandy. "But I am perplexed," I began. "Even if young Owen had returned to his former life of crime, this is not his normal modus operandi. A sleight-of-hand sneak thief, perhaps, but I surely cannot believe him now to be a jewellery crook. The blue carbuncle would be far too well known for either he or an associate to be able to offload." "Your deduction does you credit, Watson," replied Holmes, "as does your faith in the boy. But I fear the evidence is quite clear. The boy Owen is our culprit, and I suggest we make great haste to apprehend him." Taking advantage of Lestrade's invitation of transport, our motley crew all piled into the back of a 2-horse-drawn Black Maria carriage and made off at great speed to the address Holmes gave, 197 Chicksand Street, Mile End, Newtown, in White. After what I could only describe as a hellish journey through the darkened snowbound streets of London, we arrived at our destination, the Marylebone Charity Home for Wayward Boys and Girls, the only place our diminutive fugitive Owen could now safely call home. Although the journey had taken but a few minutes, the terror I felt as we sped along those icy roads of the metropolis will live with me to my dying day. I lost count how many times I thought the carriage would crash, but each time Holmes would urge the driver to make all haste. He bounded up the steps and through the door. It was never locked, something Holmes insisted upon. "The home is not a workhouse, Watson," he told me once, "nor is it a prison. Those poor unfortunates who reside there must be allowed to come and go as they please." Such was the urgency of his entrance that he nearly collided with Nurse Caskey, a kindly lady our charity had engaged to act as matron and housekeeper, to care for the general well-being of the street children's needs. "Mercy me, Mr. Holmes, whatever is the matter?" she gasped. Holmes tapped the rim of his hat and replied, "Good evening, Miss Clare. My apologies if I startled you, but we are on a mission of great import. Tell me, please." I smiled inwardly, pleased that even in times of such stress my friend was still able to retain a modicum of his manners. "Have you seen young Owen tonight?" "It's funny you should say that, sir," she replied. "I was only saying as much to Helen earlier. What with it being Christmas Eve and all, she's cooked the little uns a lovely roast goose with all the trimmings, and all the kids were lined up to get their fill, all except young Owen. Now, he likes his tuckers, Owen, and I've never known him to miss an hot dinner, especially not one at Christmas. I asked the others if any of them had seen him, and Wiggins said he'd been acting queer ever since the night before, and gone out on his own. I think that rather put his nibs and his nose out of joint, if you ask me." The door of the refectory opened, and a tiny face peered around it. "Begging your pardon, Miss Clare," said a small girl. Did I detect a slight Scottish accent, I wondered? "Yes, Shona," the nurse replied gently. "What is it, my dear?" "Well," she replied uncertainly, "I think I just saw Owen going up the back staircase to the boys' dormitory. He didn't look at all well." At this, Holmes and the doctor launched themselves up the main staircase, Lestrade, myself and Miss Jade following closely behind. The door of the dormitory was closed firmly and locked tight. "Allow me," offered the doctor. I thought he was about to shoulder charge the door. something I would not think someone of his size and stature would be able to do. But instead, he reached inside his pocket and produced his infernal sonic screwdriver. Aiming it at the lock, he pressed the switch on the handle. This time the device emitted a low buzzing noise, like a hive of bees. With a satisfying click, the door was unlocked. The doctor was about to enter, but Holmes put out his hand to stop him, placing it firmly upon his chest. Now, this action to anyone else I would not have considered unusual, but knowing my friend's ways as I do, and his dislike for physical contact with another being, I found this quite strange. "Doctor," he warned, his hand lingering for a second more, "perhaps discretion would be a better part of valour." He pushed the door open slowly. The room was in darkness, the gaslights having not been lit yet. As our eyes became accustomed to the gloom, I could see 3 small figures standing stock still, like statues. In the centre, his back turned to us, bathed in an ethereal blue light, I recognised the boy straight away. It was Owen. The blue light seemed to intensify, and I could now make out how his face and body were covered in the same grey web we had seen in the museum. But what I saw next froze the very blood in my veins. Perched on his back was a giant spider, as big as a Christmas turkey, black as night, with 8 hairy legs latched onto the boy like a limpet to a rock. Owen turned towards us, his face blank, expressionless, lit up by the harsh blue light which emanated from the crystal which he held in his hands. It was the blue carbuncle. And then he spoke, but not in a voice I had ever heard from the mouth of a child. This voice was shrill, cold, arrogant, and demanding. "Who dares dispel me, an agent of her almighty magnificence, the Great One?" Lestrade took a step forwards, reaching for the stone. "I'll have that, my boy," he said. "No, wait!" cried the doctor. But before he was able to stop the inspector, the boy threw out his hand, and a bolt of blue lightning leapt from it and hit the inspector firmly in his chest. The force of the blast bowled him across the other side of the room, where he landed in a heap, like a rag doll. He groaned before slipping into unconsciousness. The doctor held up his hands in surrender. Through gritted teeth he hissed, "Nobody move. Now back away slowly towards the door." Turning to the boy, he spoke gently. "We mean you no harm. We are no threats to you. Just let us pick up our fallen comrade, and we shall leave you in peace." It was when the boy spoke again in that shrill, evil voice that I believed that he had been possessed by some hell-bound spirit which had manifested itself in the form of the giant spider upon his back. Given that the previous owner of the property, that foul beast from Carpathia, who, as some readers may recall, Holmes and I had assisted a Professor Van Helsing dispatched to the Netherworld some years previously. "Of course you pose no threat to me, pitiful humans. I am of the H-legs, superior in intelligence and psychic powers. I can destroy your weak minds with but a mere thought." Suddenly my mind was filled with nightmarish visions of hundreds of huge spiders crawling towards me and over me, those hairy, spindly legs moving slowly all over my body, multiple eyes staring into my very soul, mandibles tearing my flesh away. All I knew was I had to run to get away from that evil room. I could sense the others could feel it too. Again and again I heard that dreadful voice in the cold air, in my mind screeching, giggling, "Run! Run! Run away, pitiful two-legs!" Somehow, between us, we managed to bundle Miss Jade and the unconscious detective inspector out of the door and down to the lower landing, where we managed to catch our breaths. Thankfully, the images in my mind seemed to dissipate the further away I was from the dreadful room and that fearful arachnid. I gripped my friend by the arm, gasping, "Holmes! The boy is possessed! Has that foul fiend returned from the depths of hell to haunt this house once again?" He shook his head slowly.
"If you mean Count Dracula, no, Watson. I don't think this creature is of Satan's making. Do you, Doctor?"
Dr. Smith stood up. The smelling salts he had wafted under the inspector's nose seemed to have done the trick. He was coming around. Pocketing the small bottle, he replied, "No, Mr. Holmes, you are quite right, and I'm afraid I've met her kind before. Gentlemen, Jade, what we encountered upstairs is a giant spider from the planet Metabilis 3. Thankfully, I think she is a lone agent sent through time and space by her queen, who goes by the name of the Great One." Seeing the incredulous look on our faces, he stroked his chin and chuckled. "Yes, she likes to blow her own trumpet, that one." There was silence. Well, anyway, it is my belief that the blue carbuncle was a crystal originally from Metabilis 3. How it got here, I haven't the faintest idea. Part of a meteor, or brought here by some interstellar traveller centuries ago? Who knows? But what I do know is that the Great One needs it to build a lattice of blue jewels, a crystal web which will reproduce the pattern of her brain. She believes it will give her unlimited power. Of course, she's completely mad, and it will just turn her brain into unlimited rice pudding. But I'm getting ahead of myself, or lost in the past. I'm not sure. That's the trouble with time travel. "Bless my soul!" I managed to bluster. "Do you seriously expect us to believe that this threat, that giant spider, comes from beyond the stars, from another world, from another time? Preposterous!" "Really, Watson," rejoined Holmes, "have I not always maintained that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt in our philosophy?" He turned to the doctor. "And you, sir, I suspect are also not of this earth." The doctor smiled ruefully. "The two hearts gave it away, did they? I did wonder why you pressed your hand upon my chest so earnestly earlier on." "They confirmed my suspicions," he replied. "They were initially alerted when we first met outside the museum. The cold of an English winter has little in its favour, but it does indicate the speed and regularity of the subject's breath. By my calculations, you breathe once every 30 seconds, even during the moments of physical exertion as you ran up the steps. Though your credentials seemed quite genuine to both Lestrade and Watson, I myself saw nothing but blank paper. Some form of psychic projection, I would imagine. And your sonic screwdriver, an ingenious device indeed, but I believe it is of technology far in advance of the industry of this world. Am I not right, Doctor?" "Sherlock Holmes," smiled the small man, polishing his spectacles with a large polka dot handkerchief. "Your observational skills far exceed those for which your friendly biographer here ever give you credit for. I'm impressed. Yes, I am, as you say, alien to Earth. I'm a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey." I turned and gasped. And you, Miss Jade? Don't be daft, I'm from Gloucester," she replied indignantly. Lestrade groaned and sat up,
rubbing his head. Oh my God, my head feels like it's been boxed by Jem Mace himself. He tried to stand, but returned to the floor in an undignified heap. I think perhaps you'd better stay down here, Inspector, said the doctor. Turning to his companion, he added, perhaps you could look after him, Jade? Yeah, right. Why, that's going to happen, she scoffed, starting back up the stairs. As we entered the dormitory once again, my eyes were dazzled by the intensity of the blue light which now surrounded all three children. I noted, too, that each were now connected to the other by tendrils of thick web. The foul creature on poor Owen's back screeched at them. Concentrate! Concentrate! Pathetically depraved juveniles! I need more psychic power for transference! Before anyone could stop her, Miss Jade stormed to the front, shouting, Hey, Spider! Leave them kids alone! This enraged the spider further. Owen's hand, like a marionette's under the control of a puppeteer, to point directly at the young woman, I knew only too well that a blast from the blue ray was sure to follow. The doctor stepped forwards directly into the line of fire and spoke quietly. Do you know, I don't think that would be a very good idea, do you? Both he and the boy stood there for a few seconds in what I believe is known as a Mexican standoff, neither moving a muscle. Finally, Owen lowered his arm. The doctor nodded. Wise move. Your power levels are already depleted by your initial psychic attack upon us and the Inspector, and you need to conserve all your energy. These poor children cannot provide you with anywhere near enough to enable transference back to Metabelius 3. How can you, mere two legs, know of these things? Metabelius 3 is not known to earthlings, came the aghast reply. The doctor pursed his lips and grinned. Well, call it inside information, eh? He replied, circling around to face the spider on the boy's back. Insolent human! Screamed the giant arachnid, arching its back as if to launch itself at the doctor's face. Who are you who dares approach an eight legs with such impunity? Who? Me? Oh, I'm a nobody. Just a humble traveller. He raised his hands in mock supplication. A traveller, like you, far from home. Now, I can help you get home, but only if you release your hold over these children immediately and return to Metabelius 3 with only what you came for, the blue crystal. Neither you nor that lump of rock belong here. Take it and leave this planet in peace. Why should I trust you, two legs? You and your kind are but insects that crawl in the dirt beneath my feet. Charming, retorted the little man. Insect or not, I'm the only chance you have of getting that crystal back to the Great One. All praise to the Great One, intoned the spider in reverence. Very well, you may assist me. But if I suspect any duplicity on your part, know this, traveller, I will destroy you and your fellow two legs and feast on your brains. What is your plan? Release the children first. I stared in horror as the spider crawled down the street urchin's back to stand before the doctor. They are released. Now tell me! Seeing the life return to the bewildered children's faces, the doctor smiled. Well, it's quite simple, really. You have enough psychic energy of your own to make the transference. It just needs a little bit of enhancing. Amplification, if you like. He pulled out his metal wand-like device from his pocket. I have a rather handy piece of kit here
that can do just that. Obviously, it would need to be set to precisely the right frequency. It's a very tricky procedure. He stared at the device intently as he tinkered with the settings. I could try reversing the polarity of the neutron flow, but I think that would just be silly. So perhaps a better idea would be to change the oscillating frequency on my sonic screwdriver here, and thus invert the piezoelectricity of the crystal instead. You see, using the crystal to enhance your psychic energy will give you just enough power to get you home. He pressed the final switch, and once again the tool emitted a high-pitched sound. As if carried on a wave of blue light, the blazing crystal rose out of Owen's hands to rest beside the spider, enveloping it in its ethereal glow.
Yes! Yes! I feel the power! Transference can begin!
Squealed the hideous creature, bathed in the cold blue light.
But first, you will all die! Feel my power!
As you well know, dear readers, neither my friends, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, nor I are men prone to fits of the vapours. But to this day we both have no full recollection of what happens next. Suddenly, as if at the spider's command, all the horrors of hell itself came rushing into our minds like the opening of Pandora's box. A flash of intense blue light, then nothing. We awoke mere seconds later to find all in the room as it was, the children and my companions dazed but unharmed. But of the giant spider and the blue carbuncle there was no trace. Only the doctor remained standing as we picked ourselves up and dusted ourselves down.
Blimey!
Gasped Owen.
How the hell did I get here?
Holmes helped the boy to his feet. Take it steady, lad. You've had a busy day. Turning to the doctor, he continued, as have we all. Perhaps you would care to explain what just happened, Doctor? He smiled sadly as he pocketed his screwdriver once more. Well, I'm afraid, as I anticipated, the spider did not keep her end of the deal. She tried to kill us all before she left. Typical xenophobic arachnid behaviour, really. I couldn't let that happen, so I upped the oscillating frequency on the sonic.
Is she dead?
I asked. No! The doctor shook his head. But unfortunately I cracked the crystal in the process. She's going to arrive home with a cracking headache. There was an overload of power.
Sounds like a typical Christmas to me,
grinned Jade. We returned to the museum. Although we failed to recover the Countess of Morcar's precious jewels, the doctor had promised that if we would be kind enough to wait outside the police box, he might find something to compensate her loss.
Well, I said jovially, we could hardly all fit in there with you, could we?
You'd be surprised, replied Miss Jade with a smile.
Then blow me, she stepped inside the wooden box with him. I looked at Holmes and was about to enter into a dialogue about the modern ways of young women these days, but he just raised an eyebrow and said nothing. A minute later the doctor emerged and handed Holmes a blue stone which seemed to shine from within.
Please present this to the Countess with my compliments. I'm afraid her jewellers won't be able to cut it for her. It's far too hard, but I think she'll find it pretty enough as it is. It's something I picked up on my travels. No, not from Metebelis 3, I assure you. It's called Jethric. He turned again and walked back to the blue box. Goodbye. It's been so nice meeting you. And you're right about the deerstalker. Totally ridiculous. He closed the doors behind him. The lamp on the roof lit up. And with a wheezing, groaning sound which I could only describe as the sound of 1,000 asthmatic whales, echoed and re-echoed around the plaza of the British Museum, the blue box which the doctor and Miss Jade had entered faded away. All that was left
were their footprints and the indentation of where it has stood in the snow. The Westminster chimes of midnight rang out from Big Ben in the distance. "Upon my soul!" I managed to splutter, looking around in incredulation. My friend, with a slight smile, touched his lips and said, "Come, Watson," and turned to leave. Not a word was spoken between either of us, but as we rounded the corner of one of the museum's galleries, I heard the raised voices of two men approaching us. "By Jiminy, sir!" cried the larger of the two, a florid-faced man who had obviously enjoyed the pleasures of too many cigars and too much cheap port far too often. "I tell you, I heard the sound of the doctor's mysterious box of delights coming from this very direction." The other fellow, though smaller and dressed in a manner somewhat more conservatively than that of his companion, replied quietly, "My dear fellow, I do not doubt what you heard." Holmes stepped forward from the shadows and greeted the two men as if he knew them. "Good evening, gentlemen." He turned to me. "Watson, may I introduce you to Mr. Henry Gordon Jago and Professor George Lightfoot, late of the parish of Limehouse." "'Pon my soul!" exclaimed the larger of the two men. The other, who I took to be Professor Lightfoot, spoke up. "I'm sorry, sir, but you seem to have us at something of a disadvantage. Though you quite evidently know our names, I do not believe we have met." My companion smiled that knowing smile I have known so well for so many years. "Watson, did I not tell you that I thought there would be others interested in this pretty little case of ours?" He then smiled and extended a hand to the two men. "Tell me, gentlemen, what day is this?" "Why, it's Christmas Day, sir!" exclaimed Jago. "Then let us away, dear fellows, to the Diogenes Club for a very late supper, or perhaps an equally early breakfast, and you can tell my friend Dr. Watson and myself all about the case of the Oriental conjurer." Epilogue. The TARDIS was travelling through space and time, a battered blue box, sitting adrift in a vast sea of eternity and possibilities. Inside the control room, while the Doctor was busily fussing over the central console, its glass cylinder rising and falling majestically, twinkling like a Christmas tree with its interior lights. Behind an ornate Chinese screen, Jade was busy trying to extricate herself from her stifling whalebone overcorset. "I'll be glad if I never see one of those things again," she grumbled, dropping it to the floor before pulling on her usual skinny jeans, t-shirt and black sheepskin jacket. "I'm not entirely sure it was worth all the bother, neither. We never found the blue carbuncle. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson never solved their case. Well, a bit of a waste of time, if you ask me." The Doctor looked quizzically. "Really? You don't think the saving of human life worth our time?" He shook his head and then grinned. "Nobody died. I love it when nobody dies. That's for the blue carbuncle." I would imagine it's now back in its rightful place on Metabolis 3. The Great One sent one of her underlings to get it for her. I imagine a great many blue crystals were scattered across the galaxy when the planet was still in its infancy. But I know it isn't the last one she will need. Being a Time Lord does have its advantages of knowing how things turn out in the end. Unfortunately, being the Doctor also means it doesn't always end as well as I might have hoped. But that's all in the past. Well, my past at least. And it's quite possible that the events of Christmas Eve 1888 may have had some part in the outcome of that particular adventure too. "And we didn't see the Muffin Man like you promised," pouted Jane. "True. If you'd be so kind, Jade, and open the lid to that trunk, I think you will find we seem to have picked up someone else." As she lifted the lid, Owen's tousled, unkempt mop of hair popped up Oh, straight and light, Mr. Doctor, sir. I wasn't nicking nothing, like. I was just trying to find somewhere safe and warm to get me head down for the night. I'm never going back to that home again. Anyways, how'd you find me so soon? Of all the Baker Street boys, I had something of a reputation of making myself quite undetectable. The Doctor grinned, gave Jade a wink. Elementary, my dear Owen. Elementary.
Hello, I'm the Doctor.
Hello, Jade. Okay, this is the costume. Right, black coat, woolen coat, with cat badge. See, cat badge. Rainbow scarf with pockets. Rainbow harlequin waistcoat, which used to fit me a lot better for some reason. I don't know why it shrunk. Grandad shirt with blue neckerchief, blue trousers, blue. Can you see those? Are you able to see those? Blue Crocs with socks. Gotta have socks. Okay. And blue hat. So yeah, it's pretty much the Tom Bakery thing, with a bit of Colin Baker and how Colin Baker always wanted his costume, which was to be a long black coat with the cat. So yeah, this is basically how I foresee how my Doctor would be. So yeah, hope you like it, and hope, yeah, there you are. turn round, the long black coat, dark blue trousers, slightly lighter blue crops. Try not to make the waistcoat look quite so tight on my tummy. Slow me down a little bit, yes. And of course the Rogers Readings glasses, which can come off if you want, and only come on for the time when I need to look at things. Yes. So there you are. Okay.